February 5th, 1850. The log of the whaleship Sarah of Edgartown at 27 degrees south, 55 degrees west. Saw a skule of sperm whales east. Saw some of the whales passed within 20 rods of the ship that would have made 100 barbels, and some come within 10 feet of the ship. They were all lob-tailing and breaching all around the ship. A brief production note. This video was developed with AI assistance, and the narration voice is AI generated. Research sources are cited in the description. Joy wasn't inexperienced. This was his 7th voyage as captain. His previous 2 runs on the same route had filled his ship in 2 years, then 2.5. This voyage would take nearly 3.5, and it would yield 90 sperm whales, mostly females and young, before he was done. His question on that August day was understandable. Something on the Japan grounds was becoming harder. Whalers of the time interpreted this as depletion, animals being killed faster than they reproduced. That explanation was reasonable. It was also incomplete. In 2021, marine biologist Hal Whitehead and colleagues at Dalhousie University published an analysis of 77,649 voyage days of digitized American whaling logbooks from the North Pacific. Their finding: the rate at which whalers successfully harpooned cited sperm whales fell by approximately 58% in the first 2 to 3 years after commercial whaling began on a given ground, then stabilized. Declining whaler skill didn't account for the pattern. Simple depletion of vulnerable individuals didn't account for it either. The team's best supported conclusion: sperm whales had, in the researchers' own words, swiftly learned effective defensive behavior, and that learning spread between social units. Thomas Beale, a British surgeon who voyaged on South Sea whalers in the 1830s and published his observations in 1839, described the sperm whale as a most timid and inoffensive animal, readily endeavoring to escape from the slightest thing which bears an unusual appearance. If they heard or saw a ship, he wrote, their fear in all cases is excessive, and they either dive into the depths of the ocean or skim along its surface to get away. He treated this as baseline species temperament, what they had always been. What the logbook analysis adds is the rate of change. Something shifted on specific grounds over specific time periods in ways that inherent timidity alone can't explain. The whales demonstrably changed their behavior under hunting pressure. Commercial whaling still reduced the global sperm whale population by an estimated 1/2 to 2/3 of its pre-whaling level. That gap between observable adaptation and population collapse is what this story is about. The American whaling logbook was a working document. Every day at sea, vessels recorded noon position, weather, whale sightings, numbers harpooned, numbers processed. A small stamp of a whale's flukes marked a kill. Other notations marked escapes. Struck and drew, the iron came out. Took the line, the whale swam off with harpoon and rope trailing. The American offshore whaling log database eventually accumulated 1,381 of these records from voyages spanning 1784 to 1920. Taken together, they represent something no one planned: the largest systematic survey of open ocean ever conducted, and an inadvertent record of pursuit and evasion across a century. The behavioral shift those records document wasn't uniform. On the Japan ground between 1830 and 1850, the ratio of whales taken to whales sighted declined measurably. On the Galapagos ground in the same period, no comparable decline was documented. The change tracked with hunting pressure on specific grounds. It was regional, not universal. Contemporary accounts, as summarized by modern researchers who studied the same logbook material, describe specific tactics that emerged on hunted grounds. Sperm whales began fleeing upwind, directly into the wind, exploiting the structural weakness of sail-powered ships that couldn't easily maneuver against it. A pod sailing into a headwind could simply outpace any pursuit. When vessels approached, whales would sound and resurface far away. Alarm appeared to pass through groups before boats were even close enough for a harpoon throw. Frederick de Bell Bennett, a British naturalist who published his own whaling voyage account in 1840, described the alarm response in careful detail. Whales that sensed danger would cease spouting, lie motionless on the surface, evidently listening, in his phrase, then sweep their flukes and turn. Mild alarm produced hesitation, strong alarm produced what he called overwhelming panic, the pod crowding together, trembling, then fleeing in tight formation. Bennett treated this as their nature. The logbook data suggests it was also adaptive and that it intensified on the most heavily hunted grounds. The 58% decline in strike rates is a statistical model derived from logbook data, not a direct observation of whales communicating tactics in real time. The social learning interpretation is the researcher's best fit conclusion from the pattern. What the evidence supports is observed behavioral adaptation. What it can't confirm is the exact transmission route, who learned what, from whom, across which bonds, across how many generations. February 5, 1850. The log of the whaleship Sarah of Edgartown at 27 degrees south, 55 degrees west. Saw a skule of sperm whales inert east. Saw some of the whales passed within 20 rods of the ship that would have made 100 board bulls, and some come within 10 feet of the ship. They were all lob-tailing and breaching all around the ship. 10 feet. Mid-century. No alarm. No flight. The behavioral change was real and measurable. It was never complete, and it was never universal. Whalers who noticed it responded by moving to new, unhunted grounds, expanding the range of exploitation rather than accepting the reduced efficiency on familiar ones. The adaptation shifted the hunt. It didn't end it. Female sperm whales live in stable, matrilineal social units of roughly 10 adults and their calves. These groups are long-term bonds. Members know each other across years, sometimes decades. Calves are raised communally. Adults stay with young at the surface during the mother's deep foraging dives. There is documented evidence of non-mother females nursing others' calves. Thomas Beale noted in 1839 an aspect of this social structure that whalers had already learned to exploit. Sperm whales were, he wrote, very remarkable for attachment to their young, frequently urging and assisting calves to escape from danger with unceasing care and fondness. But when a female in a group was attacked and wounded, he observed, her companions remain around her until they are themselves wounded. Whalers called this behavior heaving to. A harpooned cow was left in the water. The pod stayed. The boats worked through the group methodically. One secondary account, drawing on naturalist observations of the era, describes the process plainly. A harpooned whale would be left in the water while companions heaved to beside her and were picked off one by one. An entire school could be destroyed in a single encounter because the social cohesion that might have protected individuals held them in lethal proximity to a dying companion. The protective instinct and the fatal vulnerability were the same behavior. What 20th century marine science formalized as the marguerite or rosette formation was the geometric structure of that response. Marine scientist Utashiro Nishiwaki formally named and described it in 1962, based on observations of sperm whales circling harpooned group members during whaling operations off Peru. The configuration. A circle at the surface with heads pointing inward toward the center, flukes pointing outward like the petals of a daisy, calves and injured animals in the protected interior, adults on the perimeter with their tails and jaws available against anything approaching from outside. The terminology is 20th century science. The behavior it describes was observed and exploited by 19th century whalers long before anyone gave it a name. Modern field studies have documented the formation's active defensive function. In observed encounters between sperm whales and killer whales, when a predator pulled one animal out of the circle, one or two adults left the safety of the formation, flanked the isolated whale, and led it back in. Aircraft observation has recorded that when a pod containing a calf shifted in response to overhead disturbance, the shift tightened the group and moved the calf toward the more protected center position. The protection was active. It was also observed in the specific context of threats that preceded human whaling by a very long time: killer whales, not harpoons. Whether the same formation was deliberately deployed against approaching whaleboats in the same structured way remains a reasonable inference from Beale's description of social attachment and the 20th century geometric observations. It's an inference. The 19th century primary record describes the social cohesion and the heaving to behavior. It does not contain a clearly documented account of a specific adult positioning itself between a specific whaleboat and a specific calf as a distinct, deliberate act. What it does document is the exploitation mechanism in operation across decades of commercial hunting. August 20th, 1851. The whale ship Anne Alexander, three-masted, out of New Bedford, Massachusetts, is working the offshore ground at approximately 5 degrees 50 minutes south, 102 degrees west, in the eastern South Pacific. 2 whaleboats are lowered. The larboard boat fastens to a large sperm whale. The whale turns. Captain John S. de Blois later published his account in Little's Living Age. The whale crushed the larboard boat, in his words, into fragments as small as a common-sized chair. Survivors pulled from the wreckage. A second pursuit, another boat destroyed. Later that same day, the whale reappears. Swimming at an estimated 15 knots, it rams the hull of the Anne Alexander itself, striking abreast the foremast below the waterline. The ship quivered, de Blois wrote, as if she had struck upon a rock. Water roared through the hole. The crew of 22 abandoned ship and were rescued 2 days later by the whale ship Nantucket. No lives were lost. Reportedly, a New Bedford vessel later killed a whale in the same waters, identified by embedded Anne Alexander harpoons and fragments of her hull still lodged in its head. When eventually killed, it yielded 70 to 80 barrels of oil. The Anne Alexander and the Essex, Nantucket 1820, are the 2 best documented cases of sperm whales ramming and sinking large wooden whale ships. Additional incidents appear across the historical record. The Parker Cook in 1850, struck twice by a bull sperm whale and barely kept afloat. The Coral in 1841, whose log records a harpooned whale destroying 2 successive whaleboats in quick succession. The Good Return in 1831, whose chief mate was drowned after being seized in the jaws of a harpooned animal. The Augusta, before 1840, a whaleboat nipped completely asunder by the jaws of a harpooned whale. Alexander Starbuck's 1878 compilation of American whaling history contains casualty records across multiple decades and vessels. No reliable, comprehensive tally of total boat losses to sperm whales exists in the historical record. Most of these attacks involved already harpooned animals. An injured whale responding violently to pain isn't the same as a deliberate defensive maneuver by an uninjured animal. Beale himself acknowledged that most boat and ship destruction by sperm whales was more likely accidental during violent escape attempts than deliberate attack. The Anne Alexander case is notable because the whale returned after the initial boat attack to strike the ship itself, an escalation that goes beyond a typical harpooned whale response, whatever was driving it. The anatomy of the attack has since been studied. The spermaceti organ, the massive oil-filled structure occupying up to a quarter of a sperm whale's body mass, was analyzed in research published in 2016 that modeled impact stress mechanics. Connective tissue in the organ's junk section absorbs that stress in a way that makes sustained ramming structurally viable without catastrophic self-injury. In 2024, wildlife camera footage confirmed what whalers had claimed for 2 centuries. Male sperm whales do headbutt each other. For 200 years, scientists had dismissed it as myth. The footage confirmed it. The ramming capability was evolutionarily established long before the whalers arrived. The behavioral adaptations documented against sail-era whaling were calibrated against specific constraints. Ships that moved with the wind could be outrun by a whale fleeing into it. Open whaleboats were physically fragile. The kill process itself was slow. A harpooned animal was chased until exhausted, then lanced, a process that could take hours. Some animals escaped during that window. Others survived harpooning and carried wounds for months. The whale that eventually sank the Anne Alexander had been surviving with embedded irons in its head for a substantial period before any ship found it again. The sail-era peak kill rate was approximately 5,000 sperm whales per year in the late 1830s and 1840s. Across the entire open boat era, an estimated 184,000 to 236,000 sperm whales were killed. By 1880, population models suggest roughly 71% of the pre-whaling population still remained. Destructive, not existential. Sven Foyn, a Norwegian sealing captain, changed the architecture of the hunt. Foyn spent years developing a steam-powered catcher boat fitted with a cannon that fired an explosive grenade harpoon. On January 14, 1873, he received a full patent on the complete system. In his own recorded words, he believed, "God had let the whale inhabit the waters for the benefit and blessing of mankind, and consequently I considered it my vocation to promote these fisheries." Steam catchers moved in any direction, regardless of wind. Upwind flight offered no escape. Explosive harpoons caused immediate severe trauma rather than the prolonged struggle that had given some animals a window to survive encounter after encounter. The behavioral adaptations the whales had developed, real, measurable, effective within their specific constraints, were built against sail. When the vessel changed, the leverage disappeared. The first factory ship processed whales at sea in 1903. The first purpose-built factory vessel with a bow slipway, the C.A. Larsen, entered service in 1925. The limiting factor was no longer the animal's behavior. It was the market and the ice. More than 20,000 sperm whales were killed annually by 1958. Global reported catches peaked at 29,255 individuals in 1964. Between 1965 and 1970, Soviet and Japanese factory fleets took 89,462 sperm whales in the North Pacific alone. The 20th century killed at least 761,000 sperm whales, most between 1946 and 1980. The actual number is higher. Soviet catch records were systematically falsified through the 1960s and early 1970s, and archival research has since recovered at least 157,680 additional Soviet-killed sperm whales in the North Pacific that never appeared in IWC reports. The ratio is approximately 6-to-1. The industrial era killed at roughly 6 times the sail era peak rate. Behavioral avoidance had reduced per-encounter success by 58% under sail, against an industry that responded to reduced encounter efficiency by redirecting to new grounds, multiplying fleet size, and mechanically eliminating the wind constraint that had made upwind flight viable. A 58% reduction wasn't enough. The whales established a behavioral ceiling. The industry moved around it. The IWC voted for a global moratorium on commercial whaling in 1982. It took effect in 1986. The global sperm whale population today is estimated at somewhere between 300,000 and 850,000 individuals, a wide range reflecting genuine uncertainty in the modeling, with pre-whaling baseline estimates themselves contested between approximately 1 million and 2 million animals. Both current figures represent survival. Neither represents recovery to historic abundance. Population models bracket the total decline at between 57 and 68% of pre-whaling levels. What the behavioral evidence establishes, and what it does not, is worth being precise about one final time. Whitehead's 2021 analysis shows a statistical pattern in logbook data consistent with social learning. The framework that Whitehead and Luke Rendell developed in a foundational 2001 paper on cetacean culture argues that sperm whale social structure, matrilineal, stable, acoustically rich, organized into distinct cultural clans that share click-pattern dialects across vast stretches of ocean, is the kind of system through which behavioral information can plausibly move across generations and distances. The 2021 study's conclusion is that the logbook pattern is best explained by rapid social learning on a large scale. Best explained by. Consistent with. These calibrated phrases carry the honest weight of what the data can and can't confirm. What individual whales understood, what passed between a mother and her calf beyond the observable positioning, how reliably anti-whaling behaviors traveled through pods across generations rather than within them, that remains outside what the logbook record can directly establish. Whitehead's own 2026 study of modern sperm whales near the Galapagos found that they initially show avoidance toward research vessels before habituating, wariness that diminishes with repeated benign contact. The wariness is still there, more than 40 years after commercial whaling ended in those waters. Whether it's inherited across generations or reacquired through experience within each generation, the evidence does not resolve. The whales changed under hunting pressure. The record supports this. They changed in ways that reduced the efficiency of individual encounters, measurably documented in the logbooks of the ships that were hunting them. They fled upwind. Their groups circled their wounded. Occasionally, they struck back, and they still lost most of what they had been. Adaptation may have helped at the margins. The evidence supports that interpretation. It can't prove by how much. What survived did so despite the gap between animal behavior and industrial capacity, not because that gap was ever closed. Which documented sperm whale behavior do you think more people should know about? The flight, the formations, or the fight back? Leave it in the comments.